All right, people, welcome to another episode of Natty News Daily. We've got Mr. Jeff Alberts. I'm sure many of you listening will know who Jeff is. Been in the game for a long time, multiple title wins, very well-renowned coach, works with 3DMJ. Jeff, for those that maybe don't know who you are, the small percentage of listeners that maybe don't know who you are, can you give us a brief rundown of what you're all about?
Sure. So I think first things first is I'm a dad and a husband first before I'm a bodybuilder. Used to be the other way around, but we definitely cleaned that up over the years.
Yeah.
After that, then like you guys said, coach with 3D Muscle Journey since 2009, 2010 is when we first started. Outside of that, been a bodybuilder since the early 90s as far as competitively. And I started out way back in 1986 was the first time I touched a weight back in middle school and just fell in love with it ever since. So I've seen a lot, done a lot, and it's nice just to be on a podcast like this. I mean, you guys are doing some really great work, so I'm honored.
Appreciate that, man.
We appreciate it. Yeah.
So let's before we go into kind of the meat and potatoes of what I want to talk about, can you give us a brief rundown of competition history over the years, number of shows, notable wins?
How long is the podcast for?
I like it. That's good.
That's a great answer. I love that.
Illustrious range.
I mean, we can talk forever, but I mean, my first show was back in '93. It was an AAU show, which I don't even know what that stands for anymore. It was a non-tested show, of course. Got my start there. Placed top 10 out of 16. I think I was somewhere in the neighborhood of 9th or 10th. Didn't know what I was doing. I dieted for 6 weeks, lost 30 pounds. So you guys could imagine what that diet looked like. It was some bad things to do, but it really did teach me how to grind and persevere. And in a sense, it was like a 6-week torture.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I was just like, if I can do that, I can do a lot. So it taught me a lot, even though it wasn't real ideal.
Do you recall, just briefly, because I think that's something interesting to hear, what did that 6 weeks look like?
Oh my gosh, like diet wise, like I didn't know. So at the time, I didn't know anything about dieting or bodybuilding in general, just because, the information just really wasn't out there back in 1993.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, let me just eat this chicken breast and this white rice. And I think I had raisins, and that's what I ate for 6 weeks, pretty much.
Wow.
I don't know. I don't know what the calories were, but if I had to estimate, I'm going to say maybe 13 to 1500 calories.
Yeah.
For 6 weeks. So going from like 190 pounds down to 160 pounds, just chewed through a lot of muscle. I looked flat, looked stringy.
Yeah.
But at the time,
you had to be hungry
great,
too.
You know?
You had to have been hungry too, because white rice and raisins aren't really that satiating.
You know what? I think I was just so motivated, it didn't matter. Yeah. Like, it's weird because now, like, I'm 195 pounds now, and I diet for 2 days. I feel hungry. I'm like, oh, come on, Jeff, you're soft.
Yeah, smart now.
But yeah, I just grinded. I was just so motivated. It was the first show, and a little bit of an ego was kind of feeling me as well. So I just made it happen.
Yeah. So fast forward to now, do you know how many shows you've done exactly?
I think we're in the neighborhood of, including guest posings, probably a little over 40 maybe.
Wow.
So I did a lot of shows early on, and then I had some pretty big gaps. So because I know there's some bodybuilders that are my age of like 100 or more. So I don't consider 40 to be too much.
Did you early on like do multiple shows a season versus like a one and done?
Yeah, so my first 3 years, 93, 94, 95, I competed every single year. I think the first year was 2 shows, and there was 3 shows in year 2 and 3. I didn't have any idea about timelines and how to like big picture game plan and how to have a successful like extended off season. It was just diet, do shows. Once the shows are over with, eat big, train, try to get bigger, and go back at it.
Yeah.
What's interesting is it's kind of the similar philosophies we're seeing now, because I think we got a little sciencey there, probably a little too much about 10 years ago. But now it's like people are like, hey, let's get big, let's eat. And so things are very, like what I've noticed, things are very cyclical. Yes.
Yeah.
What do you think about going back to the number of shows in a season? What do you kind of think the sweet spot is for number of shows in a season, or length of time between your first show and your last show?
I think
Curious your thoughts on that.
I don't think it's the number per se. It's like how you place them. So if you're placing them, within a 2, 3, maybe 4 month time span,
Yeah.
I think you can do pretty well. But once you start extending that season out, like I did in 2019, that's one thing I learned in 2019 was that when I got to Worlds, this was my worst physique.
Yeah, you're fried.
I was just tapped out. Yeah, my physique was started like the last 2 months really kind of took its toll, and I started to, in a sense, deflate a little bit. I looked tired. My physique looked tired. And, when you're going through it, I was having so much fun though. Like 2019 was probably my most fun season I ever had. So I did 7 shows total, including guest posings. So I just had something that I was targeting that seemed like every single month. So it just fueled me. But I mean, at a certain point, your body is like, okay, you're trying to do too much. And going for Worlds, you're trying to go to another level. And I think I just over dieted. And of course, you can't see it when you're going through it. You go in hindsight, everything's 2020. So that's what actually last week when I met up with Alberto, that's what we kind of talked about, was just how to plan out 2022.
Yeah, that's something.
How
that's
long
something
was that timeline? I know it was long. I remember following that prep.
2019.
What was
it was like in total is a little over a year of. So the way I diet, it's different than, let's say, someone else might do it. Like I'm not hardcore bodybuilder 24/7. So there was stints where I'd push, times where I back off, because I try to incorporate the family life, work life. So, people see the long timeline. Their first reaction is, oh my God, this dude's going to lose a ton of muscle because he's dieting for a year. It really wasn't the case. Like if I had to really count the number of days I was in a deficit, I would say maybe a half to 2/3 of the time was actually dieting. Yeah. So we talk about refeeds, diet breaks, holidays, date nights with the wife. So more of a lifestyle, and it's not something that I could have did. Like obviously in year number 1, dieting for 6 weeks, right? That, of course, that wasn't the case. But over time, as you gain experience, then you find ways to try to maneuver a lot of things to try to incorporate the real world in with the bodybuilding world.
Yeah.
Easier said than done. Because you always want to ask your better half at the end, how successful was I doing that? Because that's where you're going to find the truth.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue into what I want to, really dive into. And that's, the things you've learned over the years, with competing, with prepping. I mean, even with coaching, you're a dad, you're married, you run a business, you're a bodybuilder. So I guess what's kind of big things you've learned over the years? What's maybe something that at the beginning you put more effort into that maybe now you're like, that's not as big of a deal as I made it out to be?
There's so many. I mean, I don't even know where to start with that. That's like such an open-ended question for me. I think probably the prep where I really had like some big aha moments was 2011 and 2014. So 2011, if I can go back in time there, that's when like refeeds started to become a little more, popular. They were starting to, be in the forefront a little bit more. Prior to that, I really didn't do too much refeeding other than just like, oh shit, I had a binge. If I would have had refeeds, I probably would have prevented those moments.
Yeah.
But going from 2009 to 2011, that's where I put on 10 pounds of muscle, or I would say probably retained 10 pounds of muscle, because in 2009, it was kind of a harsh dieting prep. It was like just losing, probably a little more than 1% of my body weight most weeks. So then in 2011, I was like, hey, let's incorporate this refeed thing. Yeah. So it was that kind of, and just extending out the timeline a little bit longer to be a little more conservative on the dieting front. That preserved a lot more tissue. So everybody kind of assumed like I gained 10 pounds of muscle in an off season, which wasn't the case. So I just got a little bit more skilled as far as how I take that body fat off and retaining that muscle mass. So that was a big eye opener. It's like, oh, I can actually diet on more food. I could actually take a little bit longer to diet instead of trying to go so fast. Yeah. In 2014, it was like, hey, let's remove the myths of, hey, I got to eat every 3 hours, or I have to train on specific days. It was more like, that's when I became more of a dad and husband. I'm like, okay, let me put family first. So there was days where I didn't train, certain body parts or whatever. It's like, hey, I got to take the kid to the dentist or something like that. So just letting go a lot of that robotic hardcore mentality. And that's where kind of that lifestyle really started to take shape, as far as let me really extend these timelines out even further to account for all these things that happen in life. So that's where the 50-week prep came in. That was a 50-week prep in 2014. And that was the year where I won the Pro International. Took fourth at Worlds. It was like my best year. And I think it was just because I was able to maneuver the preps with a lot less stress versus.
I was gonna say, do you think the stress removal was a big factor there?
It's a huge factor.
Yeah.
It's a huge factor. Yeah.
Well,
that's why personally, I'd rather have more time personally for me and with my athletes, because we're human and a lot of things pop up. And I think even with social media, you follow a lot of bodybuilders, man. It just seems like things are so perfect and smooth. I'm like, not 99% of the time, there's something going on behind closed doors where I'm sure there's somewhat of a struggle or stress there. So there's nothing wrong with having a little bit more time on your hands to be able to maneuver around these things.
No, for sure. You mentioned the word hardcore, and I think that in the early years, I mean, I can definitely speak for myself that the hardcore aspect of bodybuilding is somewhat appealing, somewhat attractive. The old Frank McGrath ads, Animal Pack, where he's hoodie on in the dark gym, and you're kind of attracted to that, and it's that reflects.
I've been wearing a hoodie too, but not because I'm trying to be hard, because it's cold.
Yeah, me too. It's -2 in my home gym right now. It's a little chilly out.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I'm hot then. I'm like 60, so you're good. Yeah.
What's funny is that what I kind of deem as hardcore nowadays is definitely different than it was maybe 5-6 years ago. I think doing the non-sexy stuff is more hardcore than the rah stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I feel like finding a balance and like actually being able to find a middle ground is way harder and shows way more experience than just being 100% like no social gatherings, no friends, no plan, like no meals off, like none of that. It's like that's easy. If you have dedication, you're motivated, you can do that. You can just stay in your tunnel. But like to be able to bounce in and out. Like I remember you went on vacation, Jeff, and you were doing your workouts like hanging from your table, doing inverted rows and doing split squats with a water jug. Like that to me is way more levels of dedication to stick with a plan when you're completely out of your environment and still progress and like go through a prep.
The old Jeff would freak out on that.
Yeah.
Like, oh shit, I don't have the machine I usually use in the gym. What am I going to do now? Like, I'm going to regress, or I'm not going to make as much progress. But I mean, common sense just kind of tells me like, okay, how am I going to lose muscle mass if I don't train at all? And it's going to have to happen for weeks on end. So if I'm just doing something and I'm using even if it's just body weight, I mean, you got to fight gravity. And if you have the same type of dedication, commitment, work ethic that you always have in a commercial gym, let's say, just apply it using your body weight. And that might mean it's a little uncomfortable taking a split squat to 30 reps to failure, but you just do what you got to do to maintain that muscle. So those are the things that, experience kind of brings. It just kind of cures a lot of the insecurity, because when we're younger, we always think we got to try to optimize things, like just be perfect all the time. And that's just not going to happen in the real world.
I think anyone who's ever done a Bulgarian split squat understands that 30 rep split squat, that's hardcore in and of itself.
Everybody did it in 2020, right?
Yeah.
I did it because I have a home gym that's well equipped. But I mean, like that was beautiful when it was almost like the Mexico trip where I was training, at
with
home with the water jug. It was kind of helpful to a lot of people when the pandemic first hit. I think that was my first post. Like, oh shit, I'm gonna go back to those water jug clips. I'm gonna put that out there. And then if we look back, like I'm an older guy in the sport. I mean, we're talking like the early mid 80s when I first started, but go back to the 1900s, early 1900s. You got guys like Bobby Pandora, who, if they're in today's age, would be probably a natural pro. But yet he only trained with very limited equipment. He probably would have thought a water bottle was a luxury at the time. So it's more about what's inside you versus what you're actually using. So that's something that I think a lot of people just have to, train their mindset a little bit more than their physicality, because the physicality is going to follow the mind if you have that right. It always starts there.
Yeah. Let's talk nutrition and the changes you've made over time. So, we started chatting about your first prep there with chicken, rice, and raisins. And now you're posting pastrami on grilled cheese today for lunch. So can you talk about how your nutrition has changed over the years and your, the way you look at things? And, you briefly mentioned the eating every 3 hours, that you don't really overly worry about that.
I was like one of your bro bodybuilders for a very long time, stereotypical. I mean, very clean all the time, year round.
Yep.
So I did that all the way until my late 30s. And this is prior to meeting the other guys at 3DMJ. So I used to work in an auto factory. I didn't really venture out online too much. Got tired of looking at Flex magazines. So I was kind of just in my own ways, kind of just doing my own thing. And these guys enlightened me when I met them about flexible dieting. So I went from like one extreme to now I'm like, oh shit, you mean I can eat a Pop-Tart, in a protein shake, and that'll do it. So it kind of went from one extreme to the other.
Yeah.
And then over, a few years time, going through a couple of preps, you kind of just realize like, okay, there's middle ground, there's shades of gray, there's context, there's timing. So there's times to, I need to be a little more bro and go back to my roots. Maybe it's a month before a show. Let's really start cleaning things up. Or it could be like, hey, I'm 6 months out from a show. I'm still in a deficit, but if I want to have a pastrami sandwich, I'm going to have a pastrami sandwich.
I was gonna ask if you have any place for like the bro style or like a meal plan or anything like that. Like, do you kind of the last 4-6 weeks before a contest really refine that a little bit more?
I do. I try to clean things up, get things really regimented, and try to go back to my roots. Because back then it was like, okay, I'm eating at certain times. I'm eating roughly the same amount of food each meal. It's looking like the food sources are roughly the same. So you try to just eliminate a lot of those factors where it's hard to just decipher what's really going on.
Yeah, which I feel like at that stage in a prep is probably unavoidable for most people, right? And that's when you're that close to the show, you're probably mentally going to want to tighten the reins anyways, and just really lock it in for those last little weeks. But like you said, six months from a contest, then maybe not as important.
Yeah, I mean, some people, I've seen it. 2 weeks before a show, a week before a show, people do kind of deviate. So it's sometimes it's nuance with certain individuals. I've seen people a day before a show do some wacky things. You're like, why did you do that? I thought it would help. So it's just, I've seen a lot of crazy things, but personally, I like to really just tighten things down, the last 3-4 weeks, especially. Let's get, a little bit more tight on things.
Yeah. Anything from you guys about diet before we jump to training?
No, not that I can think of.
Okay.
No, nothing crazy. No, I think tightening the reins, especially towards the tail end, is probably a good idea. Being wise with your food choices, managing satiety, all that fun stuff. Yeah,
we could go down a rabbit hole talking about Dan's food choices, but we won't do that.
I want to hear one. I want to hear one. So you guys are all asking me the questions. I want to hear about you guys a little bit.
Dan's dinner is always a preposterous combination of foods. Like, what was it last night, Dan?
My
like
dinner or my last
pickle,
meal?
Your last meal. We'll say last meal. Yeah.
Last
what
meal,
was it?
I don't even know. It's
one boiled egg, one pickle, like 3 slices of
like
cabbage.
This. It's like a plate full
shake.
of like.
It's I said it was like what I try and get my child to eat when she's being picky, like a little of literally everything he found, and just the macros work, and it's so funny to see.
How long does it take you to get that going? Like, how to collect all that?
That's stressful to me.
Yeah.
Not that long. I mean, towards the tail end of prep, it was not really. What was it? Maybe like a shake and a few eggs and I don't know, some pickles or fruit. Like, it wasn't much. Like carbs, proteins, fats. So it was, but as the calories get higher, my creativity gets higher. I'm like, oh, I want to eat that, or I want to eat that.
I think anytime, like personally, or even as a coach, if I see an athlete spending way too much time in the kitchen, I'm like, just eat an apple and a protein shake and you won't be hungry anymore. Because oftentimes, like I have 300 calories for this last meal. I'm gonna make this awesome meal, and they're watching the Food Network trying to figure out all these different ingredients, and they're spending like 2-3 hours in the kitchen making this 300-calorie meal. I'm like, that's just way too much energy being wasted right there.
Yeah. For me, I'm this weekend will be 18 weeks out, and my kind of day to day is the same up until my last meal. And then wife and I for dinner are like, yo, what do you want tonight? And then I just kind of
Make it work.
make it work, right? Like tonight
Mhm.
we're making our own pizzas. Last night we had breakfast, so we had like little taters, eggs, bagel. I usually backload a lot of food in the evening, just because I like to kind of just sit down with a bunch of food and then go to sleep. So lots of carbs before bed, and it works for me. That's been my method. But before, 2 years ago, my last meal was egg whites and spinach because no carbs before bed, right?
Mhm.
So I got an egg white story for you guys. So that 6-week diet I did for my first prep, I did have egg whites. I forgot. You guys made me remember back in '93, it was chicken and egg whites. So I used to eat a lot of egg whites. And let's just say I killed my ex-wife pretty bad. It just torched her. Just
No
torched
doubt.
her. Yeah.
I don't eat too many straight egg whites for that reason. I like that, just the hard boiled eggs. That's generally what I go for.
I do egg whites every morning, but it's like the liquid egg whites in a pan, a little bit of
Yeah.
fat-free cheese in there or something like that, light cheese, and I'm good to go. But I'm talking straight hardcore boiled egg whites, like real egg boiled. And we're
Wow.
talking like 12.
Oh
Wow.
geez.
Yeah.
I remember doing that in college, but that was, I would go to the whatever, the buffet, and literally pick them apart,
Yeah.
which yeah.
So what's
That's
really cool
hardcore.
is like the stuff I used to do that was dumb, like it was like 10 times more dumb than, let's say, what you guys might have been doing 5 years ago.
I love it. I love it. So training wise, you've obviously revised things over the years, learned some lessons, injured some things, learned from that. So what did Jeff of old do that Jeff now doesn't do?
You know what? My training approach has been fairly similar, even though it's been revised a little bit over the years. I think the biggest thing I've gotten really good at is just kind of knowing myself, knowing where my thresholds are, because I think that's the biggest question a lot of people ask is how much volume should I be doing? Like that's something I kind of have a good handle on. And I think what's really nice about my history is like back in the early 90s, I hooked up with, Mincer and Yates's philosophy, low volume, high intensity.
Yep.
So it's not something that I would say, yeah, it's probably ideal for everybody nowadays. But what it did teach me, along with that 6-week diet, was how to grind, how to push. And I think oftentimes, we don't see that too much with people. Like take a look at any gym you go into, and you just kind of see people going through the motions. And they're the same people that kind of say, like, how do you make those changes, bro? It's like, well, you got to put some effort in. So, and obviously common sense, the more effort, the more intense you get, you can't do as much overall workload.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to learn where your thresholds are at. So there's moments like now I'm just really good at being able to auto regulate, knowing when to push, knowing when to back off, knowing when to maybe use a little bit more set volume versus the intensity. Because there's some days where I just don't want to grind. I'm like, I don't feel like going to failure today. I'm old or cranky or whatever. Let me just do an extra set and back it off. And again, going back to the common sense thing, like I'm not going to lose muscle if I don't push to failure. It's about not training at all. And that's one lesson I learned. Like I had a 4-month layoff in, I think it was 2012. Yeah, right before my son was born. I was like, again, going one extreme to the other. Let me just take care of family and not worry about the bodybuilding thing. So I didn't train for like 4 months.
Yeah.
That was the longest stint I had over the 35 years I've been training. And I didn't watch my diet either. So I lost muscle and I gained body fat. It was the worst body composition I ever had as an adult. And I really I learned like what atrophy really was. Because up until that point, I never experienced anything like that. So like, oh, okay, now I know what atrophy is. Like, don't train for a good while and you'll see it. And then I quickly got it back like a month later.
Yeah.
So that's just, again, it's like whenever I kind of talk to my own athletes, like if they start freaking out on like their volume or their intensity, try to give that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. We've seen a rise in, go ahead, James.
I was just going to say for the viewers that haven't watched Jeff work out, I strongly encourage them to go on his Instagram and watch, because you talk about like grinding and intensity. And I know a lot of the younger lifters, when they envision that, they think of someone like screaming their head off and like slamming weights and like going berserk. And what I absolutely admire is like your intensity is entirely internal. Like you won't hear you make a noise, but you're like pushing through some really, really hard reps, and you're just like stone faced the whole time. Every single rep looks identical, and that's efficiency. You're not wasting any energy. Everything you're doing is for a purpose, and it's for that growth. So if you could just like talk about that a little bit, maybe the mindset, has it always been that way, or is that something you've adapted as well?
No, it hasn't always been that way. So like back in the 90s and like more the hit days, the mincer days, it was more external. Like I was one of the louder ones in the gym. I used to work out with my neighbor. We used to go to this commercial gym, and he's a garbage man, big dude. And he would just be screaming, come on, just going at it. So it was, a lot of it was external. And then over the years, like once I started recording my sets, and this was like when the social media started happening. So back when I started becoming a coach, like starting to record things and watching this stuff back, I'm like, this is hideous. Like I'm looking at my form and I'm like, then I kind of like, I like to look at other sports versus looking at other bodybuilders to learn more how to do bodybuilding, in a sense. Like if you look at guys like Roger Federer, or you look at like, let's say Tim Duncan play basketball, like these guys are all fundamentally sound. There's no wasted motions at all. And, you look at Roger Federer, he's serving well over 100 miles an hour and he's placing the ball perfectly. Like, how can someone just have that much power and place things so accurately? I'm like, let me apply that to my training. Let me have as much force output as I can and keep it totally controlled. So every single rep I do, that's why it looks like so uniform. It's just, it takes practice. It's a skill you have to acquire. And then when you're lifting heavy things and you're getting towards the end of a set, you're like, yeah, I'm going to have to mentally stay in the zone. Like you can't just all of a sudden, like the last rep or two, like, oh shit, it's super hard. Now I'm going to use leverage or, momentum. You could, but then you think about, okay, what's actually moving the weight? Is it my biceps or is it my lower back swinging?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, and this goes back to the conversation about, people looking for the perfect volume, perfect this, perfect that. But it's like, I think execution should come before really all of that. Is how are you actually executing those sets? It's like, yeah, you did 4 sets on paper, but it's like, were those 4 sets 4 good sets? Were those 4 sets where you dive bombed every eccentric? Were those 4 sets where you used, did well on the eccentric? Did you, cheat reps? Did you, there's a lot of things that you can't see from just looking at a spreadsheet that's, 4 sets. It's like, well, what is the quality of those 4 sets?
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, sometimes you might be able to do 2 or 3 sets and get the same effectiveness as the crappier 4 sets. So it's just perspective. And like anytime you walk in the gym for the first time, that should be the priority. Like that's the way people should be coaching it, is like, let's learn how to move from point A to point B first. Once that's sound, then start to worry about progressions. And even then, when you're working on progressions, you still want to, like, form should always be at the forefront. And I think a lot of people are always in a hurry. Like every week I got to build my numbers. Like there's nothing wrong with repeating numbers.
Yeah.
You repeat it 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, you're going to get better at it every single time. You become more efficient. And that's a key word, is efficiency. It's an easy concept to comprehend. It's definitely hard to apply it when you have so much drive and eagerness to get better, because you want to be where those guys you look up to, you want to be there now.
Yeah.
And so if you ask, like, obviously you guys are asking me, I've been doing it for a long time. You guys are now, like, you guys are like, I can tell you're going to be like, this prep, you're going to crush it. Now you're going to be the guy. Everybody's going to look at you going, what's this guy doing that's so special? Like, and you're going to tell him probably the same things I'm telling everybody else for the last 30 years.
No, for sure.
And I think it goes into like what, and Steve Hall, I know, has said this is letting the PRs come to you rather than forcing them. I think that's sort of the approach that he's taking, where it's, you worry about your execution and all of a sudden, oh, I hit a PR today. Okay. Rather than saying I need to hit a PR and then thinking about rep 10 before you've even got through rep 3,
It's not even the PR that's driving the gains, though. It's the work
Yeah,
leading to the PR that's
it
driving
is.
the gains.
Yeah.
So to me, I gave up on like trying to hit PRs. Like back in 2013 was probably like the last year where I was hitting like really good PRs.
Yep. Yep. Awesome. All right, man. Before we close this out, we got a couple minutes left here on the meeting. What's the biggest piece of advice you give to that, 19-year-old young bodybuilder submits an application to work with you? What's the biggest thing you hope to drill into his head in that Zoom call?
I think it's just setting up the big picture, like the approach.
Yeah.
Just like right there, that first meeting, it's all about, okay, this is where we want to be. Like, this is where you want to go. Now let's work backwards. So what are the steps for that? Like, of course, and that's what we've been talking about, like really trying to fine tune the training, making sure they're moving correctly, but not over programming. I think a lot of people get a little too cute with programming. It's like, you don't need a lot. Just keep it simple, keep it basic, execute the movements correctly. The progressions will come thereafter. So just really getting a nice foundation with that. Nutritionally, just making sure they're covering the big rocks, like making sure we're eating enough protein and make sure there's enough calories there to support training. So oftentimes you get a 19-year-old, they want to be jacked, right? They want to be lean and jacked at the same time. Chances are, hey, you're probably not going to be lean yet. Let's focus on eating and growing first. So it's just those simple foundations. It's really hasn't changed through the years. It's all very similar. Yeah. Just making sure you're eating enough, make sure you're progressive with your training, getting enough sleep, making sure you're hydrated. A lot of times the people that aren't making the best progress, they're just not executing. They don't have a good structure set up and they're just not executing. They like to jump from one thing to the next without really giving something an honest try and see what it does for them.
Perfect. Great way to close this out. All right, people, if you guys enjoyed Lessons from the Godfather, I think that's what we're going to title this as. I think that's what I'm going to run with here.
I like it.
If you guys like this episode, let us know. Give it a like. Obviously, support Jeff as he gears up for next year. We'll be returning to the stage, so hit him up on Instagram. Remind us, what's the Instagram handle again, Jeff?
3DMJ Godfather.
Easy to find. Thanks again, guys. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to follow us on Natty_news_daily on Instagram. And we'll see you guys in the next one.